as they are very much interested to learn theology and to extend their understanding of the Bible and to be active agents of the liberation that you have preached. Today, as we take up one course, Lord, we pray that you continue to be with us and lead us. Particularly, you strengthen me as I speak to our student friends. As I address them, Lord, give me the knowledge and wisdom and also the understanding to our friends so that they can learn the profundity of the Old Testament. We commit the class of the day into thy mighty and caring hands. Lead us and guide us. We ask this prayer in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. Friends, I'm sharing the screen. Hope you see BC001, Understanding the Old Testament.
Yes, sir, we can see it.
Thank you. So there are few objectives which you need to really know before we go into the course.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes,
Is it possible to make it full screen, sir? I think right side, I think up there, I think, or where somewhere it is there, no? To make it full screen. Yeah, okay, fine. Okay,
oh,
fine. It's
is
okay.
it okay?
Okay, sir. The previous one is okay.
This one okay?
Yeah, okay, okay, fine.
I will. If you want, I will.
Yes, that's good. That's good. That's good.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I have
yeah.
enhanced. Thank you.
Okay, okay, okay. Thank you.
So, friends, there are three objectives. The main objectives for those who are doing the course to understand and enhance their knowledge with the Old Testament. The first one, to equip the students to survey the significant historical development of various periods in the Old Testament. Secondly, to help students to get a general understanding of the content and message of the Old Testament. And thirdly, to enable students to be acquainted with scholarly debates on specific issues of various periods, maybe various historical um, periods or narratives. See, the whole day we spend on this subject, I try to give the maximum information. At the end of the class, probably I'll give you some of the notes, some of the bibliography, which you can verify in your local libraries, in local colleges, and some of the books you can get uh, as a free PDF copies in Google. And now there are many Telegram groups or channels where you get lot of PDF material free. So you can really uh, get those PDF copies for your further reading. So the outline, we have almost 8 important topics in this course. Okay. The first one is general introduction to the Hebrew Bible. And secondly, in the first topic, we cover the nature and authority, inspiration of the Bible, formation of the Bible, the name of the Hebrew Bible, and various manuscripts, the important manuscripts and translations, and formation of the Old Testament canon, and also the formation of Palestine and the people around Palestine and the people or nations in the ancient West Asia. In the second topic, it is origin of the patriarchs, you know, who are the ancestors of ancient Israel. what was their struggle for survival, the historicity, the life customs and practices of the patriarchs, their family, economic, political, and cultural life, and their worship or their association relationship with the Lord, with God. And thirdly, the Egyptian slavery, liberation from Egyptian slavery, the Exodus event, in which we discuss on uh, God as the one who stood by the oppressed communities, liberated the people from the land of slavery, and the role of woman in the process of liberation, life of Moses and Exodus theology. Fourth one, the occupation and settlement in the land of Palestine, the promised land, and the tribal life, the beginning structure of tribal society, judges, and it is prior to the monarchy. And the fifth one, we talk about emergence of monarchy and period of united monarchy, internal and external factors for the emergence of monarchy, and what was the significant contribution of the kings like Saul, David, and Solomon, and what was the role of priest and the prophets. The next one, divided monarchy. After division of the united monarchy, Israel, the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. So, what are the basic issues that we see from socio-cultural, socio-political, and even a religious point of view? We discuss all these. Of course, historical essence is there continually. Seventh topic, exilic period, and very less information we have. However, we try to understand based on some of the prophetic text and the socio-religious situation of the Israelites in exile, their understanding of God, how it is shifted from the pre-exile to exile. And the last one, eighth topic, is the return and restoration, the post-exilic period. In the post-exilic period, we talk about the return and restoration, the Persian Empire, then rebuilding the temple, reorganizing the society, reformation, new religious structure, until the period of Maccabean revolt. So these are the basic topics we have in this course. Probably we try to, quickly finish prior to the lunch, maybe 4 topics. Then after lunch, the rest of the topics. Friends, whenever we read Old Testament, I mean, when it comes to the history, we read historically, like, pre-exile, exile, and post-exilic periods. That's a historical understanding of the history of Old Testament and even history of ancient Israel. So, pre-exile, exile, and post-exile. So, in the pre-exilic period, we understand the life of the ancestors, the Exodus event, the occupation of the land, the period of judges, the emergence of monarchy, united monarchy, and division of the monarchy until the fall of the kingdoms. That is the pre-exile. Exile, fall of the kingdoms, the message of the prophets, and how the people were prepared, to continue to live with the experience of exile, and what was taught to them by the prophets, particularly in this period. And the post-exilic period is the period of restoration, and we have prophetic text as well as few historical books like Ezra and Nehemiah. So, of course, in all the historical periods, we try to understand the theological content of the particular period, historical period, and the books that are written in that particular history, in the particular historical period. So, the first topic, general introduction to the Hebrew Bible. General introduction to the Hebrew Bible. The first one, nature, authority, and inspiration of the Bible. As you know, the word Bible is derived from the old French word Bible, based on Latin Biblia, and in Greek it means books, books of the Old Testament, like books of the New Testament. And on the whole, it is the word implies indicates the meaning books. This word refers to the scriptures of the Christian church, and it may also denote the canon of the Jewish scriptures. This word Biblia, denotes uh, scriptures of Christian faith, and it also denotes the canon of the Jewish scriptures, the Judaism. There are few titles or few, labels given to the Bible, the Holy Bible. The first one is Holy Scriptures. Holy Scriptures. They are holy because God said, I am holy, you must be holy. In the Leviticus Code, chapter 23, 24, 25, God, the Lord God, continues to teach the people of ancient Israel and demanding them that they should be holy. They should be pure in the sight of the Lord because God is holy and God is pure. Since these scriptures talking about the holy God, these scriptures known as Holy Scriptures because it talks about holiness and it talks about the holy God. And secondly, divine revelation. You know, book of Exodus, chapter 19, 18, 19, 20. If you read carefully, the divine revelation has been inscripted on a tablet and given to Moses. So Moses got uh, the law from the hands of God. It is as if that God has written on the tablet, stone tablet, and handed over to Moses. So the words actually that they are talking about God is a kind of revelation of God, divine revelation. And the thirdly, it is the words of God. Whenever God speaks to the prophets, even his chosen race in the ancient days, like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, it is the God one who speaks to the people. So whatever God has spoken to the people, it is rewritten by the memory of the people, and it is the affirmation that God has spoken to them. So these are the words of God. Particularly, in prophetic text, uh, we can capture one sentence. Thus says the Lord. The Lord says like this. So it is said by God, not by the people. So that is the idea. So these are the words of God, not by people himself or themselves. So the Bible actually is replete with the words of God. And the last one, it is the communication of God to the human world, to the creation. Despite the historical content that is, that is written in the Bible as, part of ancient historical document, it is the communication of God to the human world about how God functions, how God leads the people, how God communicates himself or herself. We cannot fix a gender to God because God is beyond the gender. So God communicated to the human world, to the creation, and God gave certain directions to follow. And the Bible has certain authority and inspiration as well. No, there are four important aspects that we need to really understand. The idea of inerrancy, infallibility, inspiration of God, and authoritative. Inerrancy and infallibility. These are the two words used for the scriptures. When you read Psalm 119, in many occasions, psalmist says that your words are full of life, and I need to, they show me the light to walk. They are light to my path, and they show me the light to my way, and they lead me on my way. And the words are the Bible, the scriptures never and ever encouraged and encourages human being to be with error. Or in other words, the scriptures never and ever encourages human beings to commit error or to commit sin. Probably the scriptures may explain and elucidate what is sin, how the sin is being committed, what if the sin is committed or the sinful life is, if people live a sinful life, and how God deals with such a situation. But it never encourages anyone to be a sinful person, because scripture does not have that erroneous content. It is the it is the essence of inerrancy that the scripture has. Please read carefully Psalm number 119 with this glance. Infallibility, it never falls down, because scripture has the essence of the revelation of God, and it teaches how to be infallible, how to be infallible uh, in a spiritual life, or how to be infallible in our own faithful life, how to be infallible in our commitment to the Lord, to the covenant, to the covenantal community as a faith community. Because scripture has such authority. That authority has been given to the scriptures, and that scripture continues to encourages and inspires a human world. And it is the inspiration of God. The scriptures is completely fraught with the inspiration of God, replete or completely uh, filled with the inspiration of God. That's what uh, in his epistle to Timothy, second epistle to Timothy, chapter 3, verse 16, he says, you have to teach, you have to nurture the people, the inspiration of the word of God. And it is authoritative as well. In many occasions, Jesus, preaches with authority. Many of his disciples and people around him, and even the scribes and Pharisees and many so-called religious leaders, they question him how far it is possible for this person to speak with authority. Yes, that authority comes from God. That's what Jesus affirms. Authority comes from God, and he has that authority to preach. So the Bible has such an authority to correct the people, to lead the people in right direction, and also to sustain the people with God's words. That's why the Bible is authoritative, the Bible is an inspiring text, the Bible is infallible, and it has the content of inerrancy. These are the most important preliminary, topics when we before we learn the New Testament or Old Testament or New Testament. Third one, the second one, formation of the Bible. You know, the formation of the Bible. There are, traditions like oral tradition and semi-written tradition, written traditions. The Bible has been in oral tradition more than many years. I mean, like more than hundreds of years. There is a question in the class. Students will generally raise it. Oh, how far? How come? How is it possible? How was it possible to the ancient people to, you know, sustain that oral tradition? And how was it possible for the ancient communities to continue to talk about their faithful life, the history of their ancestors, their faithful life, you know, and how is it possible? There are many questions we see. There is one better example in the book of Psalms. Psalm 78, the psalmist, it is said that the Maskil of Asa. Uh, I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings from of old, things that we have heard and known that our ancestors have told us. Our ancestors have told us, we will not hide them from their children. We will tell to the coming generation. So if you read Psalm number 78, for instance, according to many Old Testament scholars, they say that oral tradition has been had been alive in the culture and the religion of ancient Israel for many years. After a long period that they maintained oral tradition, they started writing the bits and the pieces of their faithful stories or the stories about their ancestors. These bits and pieces have been collected. When it is written, it is a kind of semi-written. I wrote about my own grandfather or great grandfather. You wrote something your own great grandfather, and we are all from the same clan or same community. So, as a religious community, when we gather together, then we thought, okay, let us unpack whatever we have saved or protected from the family tradition, and let us keep them as a text for our community religious life. So the oral tradition has been there for many years, and then uh, just please hold on a minute. Sorry, a small disturbance. So the oral tradition followed by a kind of semi-written tradition where they have documented the oral stories, the oral narratives, and incidents that they had been shared by their predecessors or ancestors. Then afterwards, the written tradition might have started during the period of monarchy, because in the book of kings, we see a clear sentence saying that these are written like this. The history of the life and faith of this fellow has been written in the history of kings. So the written tradition might have been developed during the period of monarchy. By the time the semi-written tradition was rampant, probably in northern Israel as well as in southern Israel, or in southern kingdom, northern kingdom, lot of written document had been developed, protected, saved, and continue to be collected. I think by the time people were, coming into as a religious community, these secured, protected, faithful written traditions might have brought together to consider as holy scriptures. And what are the material, writing material that they have used? What are the writing material? You know, there are some kind of material that they have used to write the ancient narratives or stories. The first one is parchment scrolls. Parchment is a writing material made from specially prepared uh, untanned skins of animals such as sheep, calves, goats. It has been used as a writing material medium for over 2 millennia. Using animal skin is the primary mode in the ancient days. Parchment is a kind of leather, like a leather thing or material that can be used to write to record some of the important events, some of the important decrees, or important you know uh, important stories, narratives in the ancient days. Now these are the kind of course I got some material from different sources, and these are the pics that I just got collected to show you. These are the parchment that leather material like a paper to record and save the ancient thing. And secondly, it is a papyrus. Papyrus is a material prepared in ancient Egypt from the pithy stem of a water plant, used in sheets throughout the ancient Mediterranean world for writing or painting on, and also for making articles such as rope. It is an important material in Egyptian culture that used for writing and painting. Egyptian culture has developed, mostly they developed this using papyrus to write and also for some kind of painting. Here it is, a small example of that papyrus. Like, in our context, we can compare this papyrus with the bamboo sticks, that bamboo, or in South India, there are some trees. After those trees, the paper, they manufacture paper, they produce the paper that is used for the newspaper. So parchment and papyrus, these are the dominant material that had been used in the ancient days to write down the material. And this is one of the Egyptian writing material, papyrus they have used. As I said, even for painting, they have used that material. You see how a beautiful painting in those ancient days. It is to record what was communicated from the authorities, and to continue to protect the authorities, the authority of Pharaoh, and some of the uh, commandments, traditions, and cultures. Of course, I'm not going to detail what is in the picture, but I'm just saying this is the kind of papyrus that ancient Egyptians used as a writing material. And Tanakh, you know, the Hebrew Bible is is called as Tanakh. Torah, Nebiim, Ketuvim. What we study or what we have Old Testament is entirely different to the Hebrew Bible, Tanakh. The Hebrew Bible is called Tanakh, and Tanakh is the ancient Hebrew scriptures, which is translated into Greek and known as LXS, Septuagint. 70 people did that job. And when the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, they have changed the uh, order of the books. In our Old Testament, the present Old Testament, the last book is book of Malachi, right? Whereas in the Hebrew Bible, the last book is Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles. So let us need to understand what is the meaning of Tanakh. Tanakh, the word Tanakh is the combination of three words: the Torah, the Nebiim, and the Ketuvim. The Torah is the Pentateuch, the combination of first five books, which is a backbone to the religion of Jews. Uh, the the Torah, the combination of five books, are actually, you know, they're talking about the history of the primeval period, the primeval history, first 11 chapters. We call it as the primeval history, which does not have any archaeological or historical basis. And Genesis chapter 12 onwards, the history of ancestors begins. Then, until the book of Deuteronomy, the history of the ancestors and their faithful life and their struggles for survival, the Exodus event, the law, the covenantal, the formation of the covenantal community, various legal stipulations and covenantal stipulations that are given for the people of ancient Israel to be a covenantal community. So the Torah is very important and significant part in the Hebrew Bible, and it continues to empower the people, particularly the ancient communities, even the modern Jews, to identify themselves as the people of God, the community of God, the covenantal community of God. The names of first five books, like Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, these names come from the first chapter and first verse and first word of the book. For instance, in Genesis, you know, in the English Bible, it is in the beginning. The Hebrew, it is Bereshit. From that first letter, first word, the title has been framed, Genesis. And predominantly, these are Latin titles, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. Of course, here and there, some of the pure English titles we see, but many of them have come from Latin. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, these are the Latin titles. So the Torah, the first part, which is very important as a kind of backbone to the religion and faith of ancient Israel, even the modern Jews. And the Hebrew Bible, uh, uh, what we see here is a different one what we read in our Bible, because when it is translated from Hebrew to Greek, the Greek version has been changed the order of the books in order to extol or uphold uh, uh, the historicity of the ancient Israel. So the word Torah comes from the word Yara, which means to instruct or to teach. Torah means instruction or teaching. Second part is Nebiim. Na is Nebiim, Tanaka. The word probably yes, Tanaka. Nebiim. Nebi means prophets. Nabiya. The word Nabiya is uh, the word prophet. It indicates the word prophet. So Nebiim is a plural word, prophets. In the Nebiim, there are two important parts. The first one is former prophets from book of Joshua to Kings. But in the Hebrew Bible, Samuel and Kings are not two books, but one book only, Samuel and Kings. Not two Samuels or two Kings, just one Samuel, one King. So Joshua, Judges, Samuel, King. The prophets through these books who were very much part of the ancient life and ancient faith of ancient Israel were known as the former prophets. And the later prophets, mostly the classical prophets, the classical books, and who in whose names the books are there. In the classical prophetic text have been divided into two: major prophets and minor prophets. Major prophets are three: Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, whereas minor prophets are the rest of the 12 prophets: Hosea, Yoel, Amos, Obadiah, up to Malachi. And third part is Ketubim. Ketubim means writings. In the Hebrew, the word katav means to write. Is Ketubim has come from the stem word katav, means to write. The writings or the written text. There are, poetic books and five Megillot and an apocalyptic text like Daniel and some other historical books. Even we can divide this one: apocalyptic, apocalyptic text. Daniel is apocalyptic text.
Sir, please repeat the Nebium's portion.
What is
Uh,
that?
Nebium portion. I can understand. I cannot
Ah,
understand, and due to failure of uh, connection. So, can you please this portion, Nebium portion, profit?
yes. I'll do that. I'll do that. So the second part is Nebiim, prophets. There are two types basically: former prophets and later prophets. In the former prophets, the books from book of Joshua to second Kings have been considered. So Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. And the second part is later prophets, which is also known as classical prophets, because the prophets in whose name the books are there, those are the classical prophets. In the later prophets, or classical prophets, are two types. In two types they have been understood, like a major prophets and minor prophets. Major prophets are three major prophets we have: Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And the rest of the 12 prophets are minor prophets. You know, a major, minor is nothing to do with the any different classification, but it is matter of the content of the books. These prophets have been called as major and minor. Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel uh, have a very long books. In Isaiah, book of Isaiah, there are 66 chapters. In Jeremiah, there are more than 50 chapters. Almost, when we see 52 chapters. And Ezekiel, around 50, 49, 48 chapters. So, because of the size of the books, they have been classified as major prophets. And 12 prophets, they are understood as minor prophets because the books are very small in size, from Hosea to Malachi. These are the minor prophets. Nevi'im, former prophets, later prophets again, major prophets and minor prophets. And Ketuvim, there are three types of books, or four types of books we can understand. Three poetic books and five festive scrolls or Megillot, and one apocalyptic text, and few historical writings like Ezra, Nehemiah, and the Chronicles. Okay, so these combination of different books have been uh, called as Ketuvim, the written documents or the writings. According to many Old Testament scholars, the Ketuvim, the books in this part are or what we can understand the very late composition of these this part of books, written documents, poetic books, five Megillot, apocalyptic texts, and historical books have been composed almost in the very later period, probably in the post-exilic period. And this is the structure of the Hebrew Bible: Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. And this Old Testament or this Hebrew Bible is different from what we have today. Our Old Testament Bible is translated from the Greek Bible, LXS. So in the Greek Old Testament, we have the order of the books in a different format. That's why we have Malachi as last book. Whereas in Hebrew Bible, it is Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Chronicles. Narratives in the other books describe relatively late events, the Babylonian captivity and the subsequent restoration of Zion, all those things. Of course, when it comes to the tradition, the Talmudic tradition ascribes the late authorship to all of them. In the later Judaism, they considered that all the books of the Hebrew Bible have been composed from 7th century BCE to 2nd century BCE. Before, the books that talk about the history before 7th century, I think, had been in oral tradition for many centuries, and here and there they would have written some of the pieces and the information, and they had been collected and edited and composed as books in the later period. And in two books, particularly Daniel and Ezra, here and there are few significant portions of Aramaic language. In Daniel and in Ezra, there are few chapters, few sentences completely in Aramaic. So when probably in the late post-exilic period, these books must have been composed with the help of Aramaic. And the next one, various manuscripts and translations. In the Hebrew manuscripts, there are other several manuscripts have been developed afterwards. Septuagint, Theodosius, Symmachus. These are the Greek versions of the Old Testament. Hebrew manuscript is one. Out of one Hebrew manuscript, there are other writings have been developed, other manuscripts in Greek. Even in Hebrew, there are other manuscripts like, medieval manuscripts. And Samaritans have their own Hebrew Bible. That's a different from this Hebrew Bible. And likewise, various Hebrew manuscripts have been developed. And in the Greek versions also, there are many, versions like Septuagint, Theodosius, and Symmachus. And even in Syriac, there is an Old Testament version in Syriac, which is called as Peshitta. Peshitta means a simple or common book. And in Aramaic Hebrew Bible, or Aramaic, the Hebrew Bible translated into Aramaic is called as the Targum. And the Vulgate, the Bible which is written in Latin, is called the Vulgate. The English Bible translated by William Tyndale in 16th century, and in 1526. When it comes to the formation of the Old Testament, those are the few manuscripts, the important manuscripts, and the Bibles in different, Hebrew Bible in different languages, Greek language, Latin, Aramaic, and English. When it comes to the formation of the Old Testament, you see that, Hebrew Bible, the parts have been added, the parts of the books, as they were collected down the years, and the Hebrew Bible was ready by the end of the 1st century. So the first 5 books, Pentateuch, have been, collected and edited by 5th century, prophets by 3rd century, writings by the end of 1st century. So by the time of Christ, the Hebrew Bible was with the Jews, religious Jews, and they are following like Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. As many argue, the definitive determination of the contents of the Old Testament as a whole probably came only at the end of the 1st century AD, perhaps as the so-called Synod of Abner Amnia, when the Jewish community was getting organized again after the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, which is happened in AD 70. So by the time of Christ, the Hebrew scriptures, the Pentateuch, the prophetic texts, and the writings were ready by 70 AD. After Christ, it has been considered as canonized as the standard books for the religion of Judaism. The 5th one, the formation of Palestine and the people or nations around the Palestinian ancient West Asia. We need to quickly take a look at the map. I think in our Bible, in the last pages, we have these maps. These maps will give us a kind of idea of the ancient land and how and what kind of nature, this environment, geographical setting, the nature of the land, those details we just get from a map which is available in our Bibles. I think in the regional language Bibles it is there very much. So I'll show you two maps. This is the map from Dan. This is the place from Dan to Beersheba. This is the place. So this is the main land of Palestine. It is hardly 120 kilometers long and hardly, uh, I think 50 or 60. I think 50 kilometers of width. A very small country, from Mediterranean Sea to the river of Jordan. This is hardly 50 kilometers width, and the Beersheba, a village in the desert, from Beersheba to Dan, it is hardly 120 kilometers. A very small country. This is Palestinian map in Christ's time. You see Judea, Samaria, Galilee, and many. By the time it was ruled by Greeks, and Greeks influenced the land very much, and they disseminated their culture, language, philosophy by the time of Christ. I mean, after uh, probably prior to Christ. By the time of Christ, it was Romans who ruled the land. The land is divided into four main regions: the highlands west of Jordan, the Galilean hills, rising at Mount Tabor to over 1,900 feet south of the plain Jezreel, Esdraelon. The central and southern highlands rise in places to over 3,000 feet. And to the west, the hills slope more gently towards the coastal plain, and these lower hills, the Shephelah, had valleys rich in grain, with vineyards and olive groves on the hillsides. And to the west, there is a more rapid descent by steep valleys to the Jordan, nearly 700 feet below sea level, at the Sea of Galilee, and over 1,200 feet below the Dead Sea. This valley is deep and hot, but perpetual springs at Jericho provide useful areas of fertile land. Beyond Jordan lies a high plateau run through by deep valleys and stretching out into the desert. I mean, this land particularly, this land, when we understand, this land is very, uh, very beautiful. You have the river, you have the seashore, you have the fertile land, you have hills and mountains, and you have desert. All the types of lands or landscapes we find in this small portion of the land. And geographical scientists, they say that this place, particularly Jerusalem, this Jerusalem is center of the globe. It is a center point in the globe. uh, of course, some of you might have had a Holy Land tour by now. uh, if you remember, you were certainly, of course, had a tour. I think you must have had a tour in Old City. When you come out of the Old City, when you walk towards the new city like Jaffa Street, there is a big museum where you find all these geographical information. Even there are books and maps available. You can just pick up one or two if you want. So the land is very unique in its nature. It has all kinds of scapes: seashore, Mediterranean Sea, river, fertile land, hills and plateaus and a desert. These are the combination of the land. Important aspects of ancient Palestine. It is a fertile crescent. It is known as a fertile crescent. Half moon shape we see in the land. The land is known for its fertility. The combination of rivers, mountains, hills, forest, and seashore bring richness to its geographical entity. It is also known as international trade route. It is an ancient trade route. Lot of international business took place through this way. It is known as ancient marketplace because of its location in the center of the earth. And the place has the extensive nomadism. Nomadism is the characteristic of the land. Bedouin communities live in this land and they roam around the country for survival of their flocks and animals. Various nations in and around Palestine, the people of Egypt, Syrians, Armenians, Philistines, Phoenicians, Moabites, Edomites, Ammonites, Hittites, and Canaanites, and many nations around in and around Palestine brings richness. All these places they bring richness to the ancient civilization, which are the center of attraction. The land by nature is divided by its largely mountainous character into small units, often existing independent of one another. Moreover, Palestine was continually exposed to attacks from outside, either from the greater parts of Egypt, Mesopotamia, or Asia Minor, or from the invasion of those who lived on the fringe of the more fertile area, and to whom the rich life of Canaan made a strong appeal. The ancient communities continue to live in conflict with one another for land and resources. At the same time, there is harmonious relationships among the nations for economic and political coalition. This is the land of varied cultures and religious faiths as well. Particularly, monotheism and polytheism are very much present in the land. For ancient Israel, it is the monotheism, whereas the Canaanites and other nations, they believe in polytheism, gods and goddesses, the seasonal gods and goddesses, the gods who control the territories, the gods who appoint kings. So the monotheism and polytheism, they go hand in hand, they exist side by side in this land. Palestine lying between powerful nations. A brief historical survey of the old history, civilization in the river valleys of the Mesopotamian and in Palestine. As we study, as we even read in the world history during high school studies, we understand that the Mesopotamian civilization is ancient in the world civilizations. Of course, Egyptian civilization as well, but these are located around Palestine, around the land of Palestine. As early as 5000 before Christ era, various settlements can be traced along the Nile, whose peoples were already making fine pottery and using copper. River travel with boats made of papyrus. Egypt had developed urban societies and involved in huge building projects like pyramids and great cities like Pithom and Ramses. Many achievements of the ancient Egyptians include quarrying, surveying, and construction techniques that supported the building of monumental pyramids, temples, and obelisks, means stone pillars. A system of mathematics, a practical and effective system of medicine, irrigation systems, and agricultural production techniques, the first townships, Egyptian faience and glass technology, new forms of literature, and the earliest known peace treaty made with the Hittites. Egyptians left a lasting legacy. Its art and architecture were widely copied, and its antiquities carried off to far corners of the world. So, the land of Palestine, lying between powerful nations, particularly the nation like Egypt, which developed a kind of rich scientific and scientific structures and even a culture which had been predominant in the world history for many years. These are the, just I am showing some of the maps that I collected from here and there. Pyramids, the Egyptian structures in those days, think about almost 7,000 years ago. Various nations that developed civilizations in and around Palestine. Many nations surrounding ancient Israel played a key and a significant role, both in the history and formation of ancient Israel. So here I stop maybe for 5 minutes or 7 minutes break. I'll come back. Then we will move on to understand the history of ancestors, the faith of ancient Israel. Yes. Maybe before a lunch break, we will take up a few questions, and it's a one-day, full long-day seminar. You need to be, keep the Bible, Old Testament with you, and whenever I say, you please write down the chapters or the books or references, and you can refer them later. And while listening to the structure and looking at the document, whatever I show, if you have any questions to the point, you just raise them. Maybe prior to the lunch, we'll have some time for questions and clarifications. Okay, please take a break for the 7 minutes probably, and we will come back. Have some coffee or tea and come back.
అయిపోయి 7 నిమిషం 7 minutes break.
Please,
7 నిమిషం break.
please mute yourself. Please mute yourself.
Hello, sir.
Please mute. Anything you want to say?
So this is Elizabeth Visalakshi.
Yeah. Anything you want to say?
Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sir. Hello, sir.
Just
Can
a
you
minute.
hear me, sir?
Just a minute. Just a minute. Can you hear me, Elizabeth?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Anything you want to say?
No. You asked me to mute, I think.
Yes.
You
yes,
asked
yes.
everyone to
Yeah.
mute.
Please
So
mute
just type.
yourself. Yeah.
Okay.
And whenever you are getting some kind of break, don't
Yes.
leave the class. Okay, don't leave the class because it's a break for the 10 minutes only. So don't leave the class. Lunchtime you can leave and go, no problem. But there are few students, they join the class by their device name, like Lenovo K8 Plus. Lenovo K8 Plus.
Yes.
Please join the class by your registered name. Otherwise, you will not take our attendance.
Yes, sir. Sanav Mandavi.
Yeah, please rename yourself. Rename. आप अपना
सनाव
नाम
मंडावी।
को हाँ
सनाव मंडावी है सर मेरा नाम।
हाँ मुझे पता है आपका नाम का, मैं समझ पा रहा हूँ, मगर आप अपना डिवाइस से नाम को चेंज कीजिए। आपका डिवाइस का नाम दिखा रहा है।
डिवाइस कहाँ चेंज, पता नहीं सर कहाँ जाके चेंज करना है।
जब ज्वाइन कर रहे हैं, ज्वाइन से पहले आता है नाम, वहां पर नाम लिखिए। आपको क्लास से बाहर जाना है, आप जा सकते हैं, नाम ठीक करके फिर से ज्वाइन कर भी सकते हैं, कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है। ठीक है
जी सर।
हाँ। और भी एक तो है Vivo 1820, Vivo 1820। Please rename yourself, otherwise we will not able to take your attendance. You will be count as absent in the class. Please join class by your registered name. There are one more student is joining, Redmi Note.
I am Sujatan.
Those people names are coming. I'm not telling anything to them. Those people are joining the class by your
Okay.
Hello.
George Stephen, please mute yourself.
Okay.
George Stephen, please mute yourself.
Isaac Samuel.
George Stephen, please mute yourself. This announcement is only for those people who
I'm
join.
George Stephenson.
I know,
Brothers.
I know, sir, you're George Stephen. Please.
Hello, brothers. I'm George Stephenson.
Yes, you want to say something? Do you want to say something? Mr. George Stephen, do you want to say something? Please mute
Chennai.
yourself. George Stephen, please mute yourself. Yes, thank you. This announcement is only for those people who join the class by their device name, not for others. Those people who join the class by your device name, for them only I am doing this announcement. Please join the class by your registered name, like Vivo 1820, Vivo 1820, Redmi Note 9 Pro Max, Redmi Note 9 Pro Max. Please rename yourself. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Hello, friends.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, hope you have come back. Yes.
Yeah.
If they mute, that would be fine.
Yes, I'm doing it, sir.
Yeah, please then. So in the last class, in the first hour, just hold on a minute. We have covered the first topic, the nature of the Bible, the introduction, general introduction to the Hebrew Bible we have covered. We dealt with the nature, authority, inspiration of the Bible, you know. Uh, the entire first topic we covered, including the land of Palestine. The second topic, we deal with the origin of the ancestors of ancient Israel. There are few ideas that have been given to us to understand the existence or the who were the people of ancient Israel and who were their ancestors. The first one is the wandering Aramean. If you read book of Deuteronomy chapter 26 verses 5 to 11, there is a narrative. It is known as a creedal statement, the credos. O Shama, O Israel, listen this. And you have to confess this. It's a kind of confession of faith. In this Deuteronomy 26, 5 verse onwards, what we see, the people have to respond in the sight of the Lord. Particularly the liturgical churches follow this text as part of the Thanksgiving service or the harvest festival. In the context of harvest festival, they meditate on this particular text. The people with their offering, the first fruits, tithes, they should appear in the sight of the Lord, and they should say this as a response before the Lord, saying, a wandering Aramean was my ancestor. The history of ancestors of ancient Israel basically is the history of faith. And German theologians in the post-World War context, they said that this is the history of salvation. And it is also the history of liberation of the ancient world. It is the history that talks about the faith, the faith of ancient Israel, the experience of salvation, and the experience of liberation that the world, the ancient world, received. So the history of the ancient Israel is nothing but the history of faith and history of salvation. I mean, with this idea, we move on to understand the origins of ancestors of ancient Israel and their faithful life, their religious life, and so on. So, the history of ancient Israel presents a primitive people's struggle for survival in the midst of terrible socio-cultural situations. Deuteronomy 26:5 reads as, "Wandering Aramean was my father, my ancestor." In NRSV, it is ancestor. Maybe in some other translations, it is my father. It was the confession of faith which was spoken by the Israelite worshipper during the harvest festival. In this statement, we can find out two catching words, wandering and Aramean. Perhaps these words may reveal something of the origin of the people. So the people of ancient Israel were wandering, which may render the idea of being fugitive, as it is a tradition in the earlier period of their existence. Just hold a minute. When we see the people of the ancestors of ancient Israel, they are nomadic people engaging in tending flocks, and also they move from place to place in search of pasturage for survival. These are the two conditions, or these are the two situations that we can understand in the life of the ancient Israel. So they are the nomadic people. Their history is the history of faith, and they are the nomadic people in those days. And they are basically a shepherding community. They used to travel from place to place for survival. When we look at the historicity of the ancestors, the patriarchs of ancient Israel, in fact, there are few things that we need to really understand carefully. In fact, it's a challenge to decipher the exact history of ancient Israel. As per Genesis 12:1-6, Abraham came from Ur in southern Mesopotamia to Haran in the northern vicinity, and thence he came into Canaan. Genesis 11:31-12. And secondly, the speech of Joshua in 24:2-3 also reveals the place from where the ancestors migrated. The common elements in the two statements, in Abraham's and in Joshua's confession, two statements point to the around Haran, the place situated on the tributary of the Euphrates in northern Mesopotamia. This area is known in the Old Testament as Padan Aram, the field of Aram. Genesis 25:20, 28:2, and book of Hosea 12:12. Or as Aram Naharaim, Aram of two rivers. So the historicity, we can even the geographical location, according to the evidence of the scripture, we can understand that Abraham, as an ancestor of ancient Israel, migrated from southern Mesopotamia to Haran. Then he came down, traveled down to Canaan. Second, the life, customs, and practices of the ancestors of patriarchs. Their family life, their economic and political and cultural life. Abraham, as we see, is the father of faith. When it comes to the family life, Abraham is the father of faith, and he is known as a chief priest of the family because father is the head of the family. And Israelite family is patriarchal in its nature. Slave adoption is a common phenomenon in the days of antiquity. Childless couple would adopt a son who would serve them as long as they lived and inherit on their death. But uh, I mean, there is a natural son. If natural son is born, or should natural son be born, the adopted son would have to yield the right of inheritance. That's what we see in the story of Hagar, Sarah and Hagar. Marriage contract, uh, Sarah and Hagar in Genesis 16, Genesis 16, 1 to 4. According to the Nuzi text, one of the ancient documents, they reflect the customary law of ancestors predominantly. If you read the Nuzi text carefully, I mean, if you understand the content of the Nuzi documents, they reflect the customary laws that the ancestors followed. So, as we see, the ancestors are very much part and parcel of the ancient civilization. They did not exist in vacuum. They did not exist in vacuum, and they did not live life on their own. They were very much part of the surrounding cultures. If son should be born of such a union, the expulsion of the slave wife and her child was forbidden. That which explains Abraham's reluctance to send Hagar and Ishmael away. Genesis 12, Genesis 21, we see the story. Sarai came to Abraham asking and saying, "Oh, you see, this fellow, the servant, my servant, she is, had the feeling of loathsome, kind of hatredness. I can't bear it. What to do?" But Abraham, he was a bit reluctant to send Hagar away because that is against the custom or culture of those ancient days. But Sarah, as a uh, as a woman who felt a hatredness or rejected, the sense of rejected, being rejected, then she sent away Hagar. When it comes to the life of ancient Israel, the ancestors of ancient Israel, hospitality and peacemaking is part and parcel of the lifestyle. In Isaac's story, we see that after Abraham, Isaac started digging all the wells, but the people, the shepherds in Gerar, they fight with Isaac and his men. So Isaac, now he felt that okay, let's move on. We don't need to fight with one another. Chapter 26, verses 16 onwards. And at the end, Isaac made a peace, or he made reconciliation with his own enemies. Even Abraham's life, we call it, when he met the king um, Melchizedek, Abraham was applauded, for he is the king of peace. So even in Genesis, in Jacob's life, particularly chapter 30, uh, 34, chapter 34, in the case of Adina, Jacob was not ready to fight with the people of uh, these people in chapter 34. The father of that Hamor who loved Dinah. Jacob actually he sought peace with the people, but Dinah's brothers Shimeon and Levite uh, they were very angry and they felt ashamed of what has happened to her, to their sister, and they created all the violence. The people of Shechem, Jacob feared. The people of Shechem, they come and they kill us. I don't want this havoc to happen to us. He cried unto his children, saying, you people brought oh, a lot of nonsense into my life. Chapter 34, if you read carefully, they were against the ancestors of ancient Israel. They were against hostility, fighting, unreconciliation, and also violence. They sought, they were the people of hospitality. In chapter 15, 17, and 18, we see Abraham hosting the men of God. And also, these ancestors are peace lovers. They lived in peace and they continued to believe in peacemaking. Israelites' worship and relationship with God. It looks like it is a primitive way of presenting and understanding God. God as a clan God. And God promises to the people, and God promises what is very necessary and important to the life and faith of people, particularly their present situation. Land is important, progeny, offspring is important, and blessings, a kind of means of security and dignity. As these people were nomads moving from place to place for survival, the promises of God are very significant to understand uh, their life from nomadism to settled situation. So these promises indicate the ancient struggle for survival, existence, and establishment as a community. God has been called by different titles, names, which indicate their understanding of God out of the situations they live in. El Shaddai, El Elyon, El Olam, El Roy, Yahweh Yireh, El Bethel. If we read carefully, these are the references. We see that they name God according to the situation, according to the context. Out of their experience, they title God or they name their God. Maybe in one context, God is the one who provides food. In one context, God is the one who takes care of their hard situations. In one context, God sees their struggles and misery, and God would come to rescue them. So, according to the context, according to the situation, they name and they give titles to the God. And giving hospitality to God or the angels of God and receiving the promises from God were the main content in the faithful journey of ancient uh, Israel, the ancestors of ancient Israel. In other words, ancestral religion is a clan religion. A religious setup developed within the family and the clan. And of course, in the later period, it became a religion of a community. So these are the primary information about the patriarchs, the ancestors of ancient Israel. However, I just want to emphasize one idea which we, in this postmodern context, we need to understand really. When we say the ancestors of ancient Israel, we mention and talk about the men, all the men, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Joseph, and the rest of the ancient Israelites. But we need to see that the woman, or it is the family which involved in this faithful journey. So that's why, here in B, I wrote history of the ancestors, not merely patriarchs. Now we need to come to an understanding that the ancestors of ancient Israelites were Abraham, Sarah, Hagar, Isaac, Ribka, Jacob, Leah, Rachel, Jilpah, Bilhah. Because these were the people, who struggled with their faith for survival and who continue to be the witness of God's people in the history. So it's not merely the history of the faith of patriarchs, but it is the history of the ancestors of ancient Israel that includes the families of people Abraham, Sarah, Hagar, Isaac, Ribka, Jacob, Leah, Rachel, Zilpah, Bilhah, because the 12 children, even some of them were born to Zilpah and Bilhah. So the third one, liberation from Egyptian slavery, which is very important to understand when we deal with the subject understanding the Old Testament. The Exodus event is one of the important or significant event in the history of ancient Israel. Sorry, my voice is breaking. It looks like Sashmit. Is it my voice is audible? Mr.
It's audible.
My
It's okay for me, sir.
It's clear, sir. Voice is clear.
okay. Is my voice clear, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
It is better to little bit louder.
Okay. In fact, I have raised this one volume up to 79. Now I am increasing. Now I am increasing 90. 90 means speakers.
That's enough. That's enough, sir.
This is enough. I hope that my voice is.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Liberation from Egyptian slavery. The Exodus event is one of the important or significant events in the history of ancient Israel, because this is the event where we really understand God. The understanding of God is shifted from clan God or community family God to a God of the universe. The God who is above the earthly gods or goddesses or earthly powers. Oppression and slavery in Egypt. If we read carefully book of Exodus chapter 1, it says the pathetic situation of ancient Israel in which they are living. It says a king who is unknown to Joseph had come onto the power, and he found that the people of Israel were many in number. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. So he said to his people, okay, let us see, Israelites are more in number. They live in more in number among us. If there is any political coalition, they may join our enemies, and they may join our enemies, and they may reason they cause a political disruption. See, I am reading from book of Exodus chapter 1 verses 9 onwards. He said to his people, look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. So come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase, and in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. So So it is a kind of political threat that they felt, the new king felt, and talked to his people, prepared them. Let us deal with the people of Israel shrewdly. So he inaugurated the institution of slavery. So he appointed the taskmaster immediately. There was hard work and bonded labor imposed on the people of ancient Israel, and he commanded even the Hebrew midwives to destroy the male progeny. And according to their strategy, the community of Israel should be deteriorated, and there is no existence for Israel anymore. In other words, the land of Egypt is the land of slavery. Of course, according to Egyptian religion, Pharaoh is God on the earth. He is the son of God on the earth, and he must be revered by all the humans. However, the Israelites, because of this oppression, because of this, because of the situation, they started crying to their father's God. In Egyptian, as we said, of course, we come back to this point when we understand the fight between Pharaoh and Moses about the God of ancient Israel. The God is the one who identified with the oppressed. As I said in the beginning, the religion of ancient Israel is monotheism, the one God, religion of one God. Whereas the surrounding nations, including Egypt, it is many gods, polytheism. Egyptians worshipped many gods, some from the earliest days of the world kingdom, others like Imhotep added later, chief gods and goddesses. God of sun, always a key figure, Re in world kingdom, the Re god. Later linked to a sky god, Ammon, known as Ammon-Re. So Egyptians believe in polytheism, and each pharaoh is the incarnation of God, and the blessings of goddesses will be always on Pharaoh. So Egyptians believe in polytheism. The land of Egypt is the land of slavery, and Pharaoh is a kind of god. Whereas when it comes to the people of ancient Israel, their God is the one who, identified with the oppressed, because he promised. God is the God of promise, and God is very keen to the misery of the people. God listens to the cry of the people, and he sees the pain and the pathos of the people, and even God comes down to rescue the miserable and vulnerable people. Book of Exodus chapter 3 verses 7 to 8. The idea of anthropomorphism is very much visible in this expression, as if that God is like a Superman who wishes to come down to liberate his chosen race from the clutches of the oppression. The Egyptian narration, or the narrative, clearly portrays that God stands by the side of the oppressed. It is a kind of a new understanding of God in this event. That's why many Old Testament scholars and theologians, they believe that the Exodus event is the heart of the Old Testament. It talks about the God, one who stands with the people who are in the oppression, and it presents the God, the one who is against the oppression or slavery in the human history. Even we see in chapter 5, Exodus chapter 5, Pharaoh says, I have no idea of the Lord, Yahweh. Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should heed him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord. Pharaoh does not have to know the Lord, the God of ancient Israel, because he is the God himself. And he doesn't want to heed the voice of God or the words of God. Of course, entire Exodus narration, first 15 chapters, time and again it says that God hardened the heart of Pharaoh in order to reveal God's sovereignty, in order to reveal God's power, even in order to reveal God's liberative activities. However, the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, even if he is the God, he was the God of slavery. He was the God of oppression. He, he connived or cunningly oppressed the people in order to control their freedom. But whereas the God of people of ancient Israel is God of liberation, he stands with the oppressed people, and he is a moving God. He comes down, he is with the people, and he liberates them from clutches of sin. The entire process of liberation, can we identify the role of woman, which is an interesting topic for us? I don't know how many of you have read the Bible with this idea so far. Of course, we read the Bible. In the Old Testament, we read some of the narratives and incidents, and we try to understand God and the condition of the people, and we interpret in our own Bible studies or in our preachings. As theological students or the learners of theology, you are invited and you are required to read some of the incidents, some of the portions, some of the narratives in the Bible from different vantage point. One is whether a liberative role is being played by women in any context. The Exodus context is inviting us to understand the role of woman for the liberation of the Hebrews. Probably we can identify three, areas. Of course, you can in your reading you can add more. I just give only three ideas, at this point. The first one is the midwives, chapter 1, verses 15 to 22. Midwives are very sharp, very wise, very active, very diligent. What they did, they did not do according to the word of Pharaoh, but they did what is necessary to the people of Hebrews. Midwives, Pharaoh commanded them, ordered them. You know, when you act as midwives to the Hebrew woman, and when you see them on the birth stool, if it is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, she shall live. But midwives, they feared the Lord. They feared the Lord, and they said, what they did. They did not do as the king of Egypt commanded, but they let the boys live. In verses I am reading from, chapter 1, verses 15, 15 onwards. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this and allowed the boys to live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. The activeness of midwives. The wisdom, the alertness of midwives has to be acknowledged. They did not do what Pharaoh had commanded, but they feared the Lord. They were an effective role. They played an effective role as agents of God's liberation. And they initiated their participation. And also they implemented the strategy that they could do. They could plan. In the same way, chapter 2, verses 1 to 10, the story of Moses. Moses was born to a Levite family. We know Imram and Jochebed were the parents of Moses. Moses was born when the land of Egypt was quite against the birth of boys in the families of ancient Israel. And his mom left him in a small cage. And he was just an abandoned child. But his sister assisted him, found him. And when his sister found that the daughter of Pharaoh, got this boy who was wrapped in a small basket flowing on the river, then sister, rushed to the daughter of Pharaoh and said, "Ma'am, if you wish, I would bring a maiden for this boy to bring up." She was very wise, very clever. She said, "Yes, you can go and bring." Then she brought the boy's mother to be the maiden for the boy. The activeness of woman in this narrative is amazing. The mother of Moses, the sister of Moses, the daughter of Pharaoh, all these women were amazing. They stood for the life. They protected the life. They sustained the life. And they continue to secure the life. And third incident, probably chapter 15, verses 20 onwards, the song of Miriam. Now she gathered some of the women and started singing how, grateful that the community should be to God for all the liberative activities that God is doing. And she was known as a prophetess. She took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with the tambourines and with dancing. And Miriam sang to them, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea." Of course, the previous song, the previous verses, chapter 15, verses first onwards, the Moses and the Israelites sang a song, like a community song. But the specific reference to Miriam and the group of women who sang this song really reminded us how active the women were as agents of God's liberation, as the proclamation of God's liberation. They proclaimed, they promulgated the liberative activities of God. So the role of women in these instances, if we see, they have become an effective role as agents of God's liberation. They wonderfully initiated their participation. They bravely implemented the strategy they could. They bravely implemented the strategy, and even they risked their own lives, and they promulgated, they upheld the idea that the liberation is the work of God and we can play an effective role. We cannot liberate the people, but we can be an effective tool in the process of liberation. Liberation is the work and act of God. They just played their roles as they could. This is an important, important, uh, important perspective. We need to really bring it out. I don't know how many of you have gone through or understood the Exodus narrative from this vantage point, from this point of perspective. But this is the time to realize the role of woman in particular in this Exodus context, to understand how effective they are as agents of God's liberation. And third one, Moses. Moses, as we see, he is a God-fearing person. His life is exemplary. His call, if we see book of Exodus chapter 3, he encountered God on the mountain of Horeb. Then he had a long conversation with God, and God convinced him, and God even talked to Moses for a long time, and God uh, revealed the purpose of his talk to Moses. And God prepared Moses to be his agent in the land of slavery. Moses, a God-fearing person. When we look at his life, calling, leadership, and success, and also some of the failures, we can learn many things. He was very much concerned about his people. Book of Exodus chapter 2 verses 11 onwards, we see that when he saw two people quarreling, like an Egyptian and an Israelite, he was very furious, and he killed the Egyptian person. He was very much concerned about his own people. Of course, he confessed that he was not an eloquent speaker. In some of the translations, it says, uh, Moses says, I am not a good speaker. I am, in some of the translations, it says, Moses says, I am slow in speaking. And in some translations, it says, I am not eloquent speaker. I think NRSV has chosen to say, NRSV has translated like, I am not, and in verse 10, it says, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor even now, that you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. So he confessed, he just revealed that he is unable to take up the task. He is very genuine and true to his situation. But when Moses, took up the leadership, he became very strong, strong, strong. Through the situations, he acted as an active agent of God. That's what we need to really understand. Uh, and when we see Moses and his leadership, Moses had become very patient with his own people. Just hold on a minute, please. Just hold on a minute, please. You can just read these few lines. These few lines. I'll just come back in a half minute. Uh, so after he took up the responsibility to be the uh, mediator between God and the people. He became very patient with people as well as with God. This is one of the best qualities of Moses' leadership. In chapter 14, people, people like, they came to Moses very furiously, arguing that, you want to kill us in the desert. We would have lived peacefully in the land of slavery, in the land of Egypt, instead of, losing lives in the desert. So they accused Moses as a murderer. Moses was very, very brave, very patient. He said, "Don't talk too much, just wait and see that God is going to fight for you." And in chapter 30, I believe, I'll show it to you now. You have Bibles, just I think in chapter 34, Moses even, talking to God, asking God to be considerate with these rebellious people. Of course, they don't listen to God and they continue to be disobedient, but have patience with the people. Moses was such a nice man, a very kind man, a very patient with the people and God as well. And some of the qualities, if we see in the leadership of Moses, particularly, he introduced the name of God to the people. In book of Exodus, chapter 3, verse 14, Moses asked God, "What should I say when people ask me about you?" Okay, so far people, they believe in the God of their fathers, their ancestors. But now you asked me to go and talk to Pharaoh and to get the people out of the land of Egypt and lead them to the promised land. Fine. But what should I say? He said, "I am the one who will be forever, the God of eternity." It is not the name. Yahweh is not a name. In fact, it is a verbal form, third person masculine singular, active verb, third person masculine singular, which can be translated in a simple present as well as simple future. Simple present and simple future. So I will be that I will be, or I am that I am. Both translations are possible. So Yahweh is like, if we translate Yahweh, it is like I am that I am, or I will be that I will be. That God communicated to Moses that he is the God of eternity, the God, one who lives eternally. In Greek, it is translated as Adonai, the Lord. The Lord is the one who is supreme. Beyond him, there is no sovereignty. So that is the idea, Adonai, that the Greek translation has taken up as equivalent to the word Yahweh. Moses also introduced the law of God to the people. Moses is an effective mediator. He introduced the law, you know, the law of God, the covenantal code, book of Exodus, chapter 20 to 22, 20 verses. The important section of covenantal stipulations that keep the people of Israel as community of God. Moses taught the people of Israel the covenantal stipulations, the covenantal laws which keep people as the people of God. And he was an effective mediator in the formation of people of God. There is a old, some scholar called Peter Ackroyd. He wrote a wonderful book on the people of God in the Old Testament. He talks about the formation of the people of God. We learned that the people of ancient Israel were in the land of Egypt as slaves. From the context of the situation of slavery to the situation of God's people, the transformation, the formation is taking place under the leadership of Moses, mediatorship of Moses, with the help of the covenantal law. And Moses is also a very good leader. Chapter 18 presents us his leadership strategies, to help the people, to lead the people with justice. He led the people to be a covenantal community in the travel, in the desert. Their journey in the desert is not merely a journey, but the journey of becoming the people of God, the covenantal community, which Moses, led the people to become like that. Moses, in a way, is the founder of monotheism in ancient Israel because he revealed the name of God, he introduced the law of God, and he became an effective mediator, a good leader, and also the founder of monotheism in ancient Israel. Exodus theology, Exodus theology there are few important points for us to understand. The liberation, the act of liberation, the essence of law, the theme of covenant, and the idea of presence of God. Liberation, God is the God of liberation. That is the a great idea that the book of Exodus, that Exodus event presents us. God is the God of liberation. God stands against the oppression. That's what we need to really understand. God stands against the oppression. And God nullifies any kind of slavery that the institution of slavery that human authorities implement or impose. God does not tolerate. God becomes intolerant when injustice or unjust structures were active in human societies, in human world. So God is the God of liberation. And God does not allow any oppression and injustice active in the life of human world, human communities. And secondly, the law. The law gives a kind of formation of people to be a new community, to form a new community. There are, three types of laws basically. Eh, in the covenantal stipulations, we can identify three types of laws. One is covenant code, book of Exodus chapter 20 verses 1 to chapter 22. It is purely religious and ethical stipulations. Their commitment, they have to commit to the Lord, and they should not depart from their God. And they should follow certain ethical stipulations to continue to be the people of God. It is a kind of religious laws. And secondly, Leviticus code, book of Leviticus chapter 17 to 26 as part of the larger 12 to 26 legal codes, particularly 17 to 26, they are also known as holiness code or priestly code. Purity, impurity, or holy, unholy. These are the major topics in this Leviticus code. The predominant views or stipulations are about food habits, human relationships, sexual relations and blood relations, kith and kin values, offerings and different sacrifices. The third one is Deuteronomy code, book of Deuteronomy chapter 12 to 26. These are the combination of social laws, economic laws, and political laws. In the modern reading, someone interpreted them as human rights because they are very much concerned about the life of humanity. The least in a society, the poor, the orphan, the widow, the sojourners, God is very much concerned about them. And God does not spare anyone if they deal with these people unjustly. So these laws, covenant code, Leviticus code, Deuteronomy code, these laws give a kind of formation to the people of Israel to become a new community or to form a new community of God. So Exodus theology introduced and encouraged the people to be a God's community or covenant, God's community and a covenantal community with God. And covenant, if we carefully understand, it is God's covenant initiated to reach the human communities. In this context, we can understand and interpret this in a way. Some scholars identify some of the Hittite covenant formula, elements of Hittite covenant formula in this covenant setup between God and the people of ancient Israel. Hittite covenant formula, according to Hittite covenant formula, the victorious king, the covenant is made between victorious king and vassal king. The vassal treaty, the king who accepts the defeat, he has to make a covenant with the king who is more powerful than him. He has to submit to the king. He has to submit his army to the king. He has to even, pay a lot of money as a tribute to the king. And he must be obedient to the king. He cannot be rebellious in any way. This is a kind of Hittite covenant vassal treaty, covenant formula we see. Some scholars identify some of the elements are found in the covenant between God and the people of ancient Israel. However, the covenant made by God with the people of ancient Israel is not like vassal treaty, but it is something that God himself, made with this covenant with the people, inviting them to be his own people. God owns people. God makes people as his own community. That's what he says. You are my people. I am your God. God's presence is, throughout the narrative or incident is very much interpreted that God is available with the people. God continues to be with the people. God continues to be with the people. They can feel God's presence, they can experience, and they can even share with others. Just hold on a minute. Just hold on a minute, please. Yes, God's presence they can feel, they can experience, and also they can disseminate in the community. And God's presence is a liberative presence, and God's presence is a potential element in their lives. They can feel security, and they can feel protected, and they can feel safeguarded in the journey. Exodus event is part of salvation history of ancient Israel. It disseminates the salvation experience, the salvation experience of the salvation experience of the people of ancient Israel. So Exodus event actually presents to us how powerfully God liberates the people from the clutches of slavery and oppression. God proves God's self as the God of liberation. And God stands with the people who have been oppressed or who are in the clutches of oppression and slavery. So this new understanding, yeah, unlike the ancestral narratives, Exodus event actually helps us to realize and understand God from a new point of view. The liberative activities of God are very clear in this context, in this instant, Exodus event. So Exodus is a kind of very much part of the salvation history of ancient Israel. The next one, occupation and settlement in the land of Palestine. Occupation and settlement in the land of Palestine. When we deal with this topic or theme, we need to take some of the views into our mind, particularly biblical evidences, historical archaeological evidences. Based on those two evidences, there are few hypothetical theories or models how the ancient Israel has occupied the promised land, the land of Canaan. In this context, the biblical scholars proposed present the occupation of the ancient Israel in the land of Canaan in different models. The first one, see, there are few models. Models, they are also called as the models of settlement, the settlement model. The first one is the conquest model. The conquest model, talks about the people of ancient Israel had conquered the land of Canaan by invasion, by war, by fighting. This model proposes that the incident took place in 13th century BCE, not BCS, not your course, BCE. This model was proposed by W.F. Albright and upheld and emphasized by John Bright and G. Ernest Wright. This theory was based on the biblical narratives with the support of archaeological evidences. It says that the people of ancient Israel entered into the land of Canaan using violence. There was a lot of destruction took place. The 13th century conquest was possible due to the support of archaeological evidences of Bethel and Debir and their destruction. According to G. Ernest Wright's analysis of data, if the conquest was set at around 1220 BCE, the Exodus would have occurred around 1260 BC. That is 40 years earlier, according to Numbers 1433. This further confirmed by Nelson Gluck in 1930, who, after some excavations at Transjordan, concluded that the region was devoid of any settled population between 19th and 13th centuries BC. Some propose that the date of conquest is 15th century BC on the basis of fall of Palestine, fortress cities, at the end of Middle Bronze Age, 15th century BC, by a big and unified group from Egypt. Of course, there are two theories. One is 13th century and is 15th century. But 13th century invasion got attention of many scholars, and it is more probable and feasible to accept, because in the 13th century there was a lot of destruction and conquest and destruction took place according to archaeological evidences, and many scholars believe that the conquest would have taken place in 1220 BCE, before 40 years when Exodus event took place in 1260 BC. I think this is a small photo I collected somewhere. This is how, this is how people invaded the land of Canaan. And secondly, it is a peaceful infiltration. This is another settlement theory proposed by some of the scholars like Albrecht Alt, Martin North, and M. Weipert. The scholars also hold on to 13th century as the dating of the entry into the land of Canaan. 13th century, they also emphasized 13th century. Ancient Israel entered into the land through a peaceful infiltration. The semi-nomadic tribes infiltrated peacefully into uninhabited or sparsely inhabited territories and into the gaps between the Canaanite cities at a time when no firm control was being exercised by Egypt. This peaceful occupation of taking possession of the land was followed by a period of consolidation, when settling and developing the country, the tribes came into conflict with the Canaanite cities. The occupation thus a long process and was characterized by various displacements of people and geographically distinct movements. Some scholars, proposed instead of invasion, violence, fighting, war, there was a peaceful infiltration. They just, infiltrated into the city, into the land. And they settled here and there where the land was free between the Canaanite cities. That's what in Book of Judges, chapter 1 presents that the people of ancient Israel lived with the many people around. And third one, of course, each theory has some lacuna, some drawback, some positive points and some negative points. For instance, the first theory, if we read conquest theory, it is ancient Israelites were, they did not get developed as a community with army, with weapons. They were not in a position to do a war or to fight with the enemies and to occupy the land. It is a bit difficult to understand. And infiltration, they completely deny the kind of fighting or invasion, but they affirmed that, or they believed that the people uh, who fled from or flew from the land of slavery, they settled into the land of Canaan, a kind of intrusion. They just intrude into the land and kind of peaceful infiltration. But this theory did not answer the battles or the violence that took place according to the book of Joshua. The third theory, you know, it uphold or it introduces a kind of revolt theory, peasant revolt. In 1964, actually, the Journal of Biblical Literature, G. A. Mendenhall, published an article by name The Hebrew Conquest of Palestine. The Hebrew Conquest of Palestine. It is a kind of, it talks about internal revolt, the people who suffered at the hands of foreign military powers, such as Hittites, Hivites, Girgashites, Perizzites, and Jebusites. What caused in rebellion was the small mixed group who had made a covenant at Sinai with Yahweh. The terms of the covenant between Yahweh and this newly formed community of Israel were such that they created a solidarity of loyalty, which was attractive to all persons suffering under the burden of subjugation to a monopoly of power, which they had no part. The early Israelites were thus seen as the native peasantry of Canaan, withdrawing from the oppressive structures of the city-state system. This is Canaanite city-state system. The slaves who ran away from the land of slavery joined these people, and they formed as one community in the name of covenant, and they occupied the land by a revolt. Norman K. Gottwald, he composed a wonderful book. I mean, he worked on this book for more than a decade, The Tribes of Yahweh, and he explains the early Israel was an eclectic formation of marginal and depressed Canaanite people, including feudalized peasants. Eclectic means heterogeneous, varied or wide-ranging, not a single community, but a communities of community, people from different backgrounds, different socio-cultural backgrounds, a different, territorial context, formation of marginal, depressed Canaanite people, including feudalized peasants like Hoops, Apiru communities, mercenaries, adventurers, transhuman pastoralists, tribally organized farmers, and pastoral nomads. And they probably also itinerant craftsmen and disaffected priests. He also proposed that Israel's social structure was a deliberate retribalization process rather than an unreflective unilinear carryover from pastoral nomadic tribalism. What Norman K. Gottwald established or tried to establish is that these people of ancient Israel, what we read their history, according to him, they were from different backgrounds, and they joined together as a one community in the name of the covenant of Yahweh. And they are from different backgrounds, different cultures, different nations, and even with the different experiences. They joined as a community and formed as one community in the name of the covenant. So he believes in retribalization process. They were like divided into 12 tribes. Each tribe holds a piece of land and territory. That's how this community, a covenantal community, formed as people of God. So these are the few theories. Of course, there are some more theories. All other theories have been knowingly, unknowingly based on these theories only. That's why these three theories are important for us to learn primarily. The structure of ancient Israel, the tribal society of ancient Israel. Martin North proposes a kind of, one structure that is amphictyony. In the ancient days, people from same family or clan used to live in one place, placing the image or idol of clan deity in the center. In the ancient Israel, there are many places known as high place, which might have been considered as the places of amphictyony living in those days. Almost all the ancient people lived in this format, developing socio-cultural values based on their belief system. In the picture, if you see a round, this one, this is a kind of a symbol of god or goddesses around which the people live as a community. This is the proposal of Martin North, that the people of ancient Israel lived like this. This is the tabernacle, the presence of God, around which the people form or continue to or establish themselves as a community of covenant or God's people. Tribal confederacy is a main essence, a united federation among the tribes for a common goal of living under the covenantal laws. Their structure is based on the united federation among the tribes. Norman K. Gottwald calls it as United Tribal League. Israel, a revolutionary peasant, according to Gottwald, the socio-religious retribalization has taken place. According to this structure, they lived as a religious community under which all the tribes have taken equality or identity as the people of God. So this is also another view developed by Norman K. Gottwald, that the people lived in a united tribal community format, which he calls United Tribal League. It is a kind of retribalization that they follow to live as a religious community with equality and identity as the people of God. Socio-political and religious life during the period of Judges. After the occupying and settling in the land, we see the book of Judges, that talks about how the people have been chosen as judges and what was their duty and how did they serve their own community. The period after Joshua, before the time of Samuel, until the time of Samuel, we see some period where judges ruled or led the people. Ancient Israel lived with many communities. It's a pluralistic society, but they were directed to follow the covenantal laws of the religion of Yahweh. A new generation without awareness of Yahweh's leading into the promised land had come up. Judges 2:10, if you see, a new generation had come up. There was a religious syncretism, according to many scholars who read the history of Israel in this period. Religious syncretism means the influence of other religions intruded into the religion of Yahweh. In this period, there was a lack of centralized administration. Of course, tribal leadership is predominant because it is a united tribal league. All the tribes have been united in the name of the covenant, and tribal leadership got dominance. Of course, they did not sustain a defensive mechanism. That's why it is very weak in defensive mechanism, and no proper military powers, and pastoral nomadic lifestyle. There is a shift from pastoral nomadic life to agricultural life. in this process, people, took time to organize themselves as a community, because thus far they were nomadics. I mean, they followed the nomadic life. Even people ran away from the land of slavery. Now they were settled communities with the agricultural life. So you have to find out, there is a question for you to understand. How many judges did rule the people of Israel at this period? What are the names of judges? Who are the enemies they faced? So you just, do this exercise for yourself. The office and role of judges. Shofet. The word judges, judge means in Hebrew shofet. This is a Samson figure, the pic I am showing. And these are Deborah, Samson, and Eli, Samuel. Some of the pics I'm just, collected from different sources. Yahweh, the God of Israel, raised judges from different clans. Judges are the charismatic military leaders. They also the executors of justice, rulers and deliverers. Shaphat means to rule. Shaphat means the one who rules. To dismantle the internal disunity among the tribes and to set wars against the external enemies. Maybe the duties fighting with surrounding nations or threatening nations like Philistines, Midianites, Ammonites, and Jebusites. These are the main duties of the judges. Some scholars like Gerhard von Rad, called these wars as holy wars. And judges, they did not rule or function on their own, but according to the guidance of God. It is God's given governance they have taken up. The lesson we can learn from each judge is, above all, that those who are dedicated to Yahweh can be used by Yahweh as the individual because of their dedication. Despite of their shortcomings or temptations, Yahweh could use them to deliver Israel from its oppressors and to keep the tribal federation alive until Israel was ready for the next stage in his great redemptive purpose. Judges, they tried their level best to stand for the people, to live according to the call of God, and they became protectors, like warriors, military warriors for their own people. The tribal social organization during the period of judges is like the family, the clan, the tribe. In Israel, an individual cannot stand alone. Instead, an individual is firmly integrated in the hands of the society at large. The individual is firmly integrated in the bonds of the society at large. No individual entity, but it is a kind of community entity. Family, clan, and tribe. That is the structure of social structure of ancient tribal life. As we see, Norman Kick-Gartwell proposes the united tribal league. There was a unity among the tribes to have a common God, unified legal systems, and stipulations known as covenantal laws. People lived according to the stipulations of the covenant, Deuteronomy 6, 1 to 17, Joshua 24, and people followed certain legal system that united them as one community of God. Israelite society as a unique and politically decentralized power and socially an egalitarian society as against stratified society. Covenant, the center of socio-cultural and religious values. Actually, covenant is a kind of backbone for the social, socio-religious life of the ancient Israel. So this is the life structure, and the some of the important elements in the life of ancient Israel prior to the monarchy. I just stop here. Maybe let us take 5 to 10 minutes. If there are any questions or any doubts or anything that you need to be, then you want me clarify. Let us take, maybe it is 12:55, 12:56, maybe 10 minutes. Then let us wind up the class by 1:05, and we will come back at 3 o'clock sharply to continue to finish the rest of the 3 or 4 topics that we have. So any quick doubts or any questions or anything you want to get clarification?
I want a clarification on that.
Yes.
Israelites worship and relationship with God. You have said that God has been called by different names, which indicate their understanding of God. So it is just their understanding or how they perceive God, or how God revealed himself to them.
Yes.
Is it both, or just their understanding?
Okay. Okay. Can I collect some of the questions together, 2 or 3, something like that, so that I can respond to your questions? Their understanding of God is one question. Then any other questions? Okay, then let me respond. See, in the pre-Mosaic period, according to many scholars, in the pre-Mosaic period, I mean in the period of ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, God has been understood, identified, and called according to the context, according to the situation of life. In some context, they found that God is a protector. In some context, they see God as the one who, sees their struggles or their misery. In one understanding, they see God as the sovereign. Pre-Mosaic period, I mean, prior to Moses, the period of Moses. From the Exodus onwards, Moses introduced God as the one who lives forever, the God of eternity, the same God who the forefathers or ancestors of ancient Israel worshipped. Since the Mosaic period, or from the moment Moses introduced God as the one who lives forever, the God of eternity, then the idea or understanding of God has been changed. Since then, the ancient Israel understood and called God as the God, the Yahweh, the Lord. But whereas in the ancestral narratives, God has been understood and called or labeled according to the context. That is the difference that we see in the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus.
Thank you, sir.
No, thank you. Good. At the end of the probably lecture, I'll try to share this document with Sasmit Singh. Sasmit may send it to all of you, I believe.
Okay, sir. No problem, sir. No problem.
Okay,
Sir.
okay. So if there are no serious questions, or if you have any questions, in chat box, wait, I see. Many teach Daniel is also classified as a major prophet. but in today's teaching, only 3 are classified as major. Kindly clarify. Yes, sir. Uh, Once the book of Daniel was part of the major prophets, once in the sense, some decades ago. But the Old Testament scholars are the people who read the Old Testament books intensively, carefully, identifying and analyzing the content of the prophetic text. They came to a conclusion that the book of Daniel cannot be a prophetic text, rather an apocalyptic text. Apocalyptic text in the sense it talks about the revelation of God. The God is the king of the universe, the sovereign God. And there were a lot of apocalyptic elements in the book of Daniel, through dreams, through signs and symbols. And Daniel and his friends, they had to interpret the dreams of the kings, and they had to interpret God. They have found that God is the king of the universe beyond the powers of the earth, earthly kings. So lot of revelation took place in the book of Daniel about the power and sovereignty of God. So many scholars, they found that book of Daniel in the Old Testament, the book of Revelation in the New Testament, they had lot of similarities, about the revelation of God. So they identified this book of Daniel more of an apocalyptic text rather than a prophetic text. Whereas Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, we can see quite a prophetic nature. They received the words of God and they were sent to the people to say what God has commanded. Daniel is more than a revelation of something mysteries from God, and they had to interpret and disseminate those mysteries through their experiences of revelation. That's literature. Okay, thank you. Thank you. We will continue. Please join at 3 o'clock sharp. Okay, 3 o'clock
Okay,
sharp.
sir. Okay, sir.
3 to
Request. Yes.
Yeah.
Anything, sir? Anything?
Yeah, 3 probably we go up to 5:30. We finish the entire topics, the rest of the 4 topics. Okay.
Okay, sir. Okay. I request all the friends, please come and join exactly at, I will on the classes 2:55 so that we can start exactly at 3 o'clock. Okay. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.